Well, then let's, just being aware of time, move on to the second article, which is, where do children learn social skills? Okay, this is a hot topic, right? I know a lot of people, a lot of educators, a lot of doctors. This tends to be an area of contention with a lot of professionals. And it's funny, it doesn't always go the way we think it would. I used to be a classroom teacher. I founded a charter school here in DC, and I've worked with many schools. And I talked with some schools who, want to be, this resource where, kids are learning their social emotional skills at school, right? And they put in all these curriculum and other things. And then I talked to other schools and educators who said, no, we're not here to teach it. We're here to reinforce it, right? We're here to help you practice it. We don't want to be the front lines because we can't be, because they recognize that these social skills start at home. And many of the teachers I used to talk to about that, felt very strongly that this stuff has to happen at home before it happens at school. So there's two very opposing sides to some of this perception that kids should go to school to learn these social skills. And I know a lot of kids, especially parents, are being told to put their kids in school early, especially with these developmental challenges, to be around other kids, to learn social skills. But how can you learn what you don't understand, right? If someone puts me in a class with a bunch of people speaking, Spanish, which I really do want to learn actually as an adult, just because I'm in there doesn't mean I'm going to learn it. Now, let's take one other factor into consideration. By definition, the children we're talking about, the children especially on the autism spectrum with some of these social emotional delays, are not naturally learning from their environment. They're not picking up on the emotional cues of the environment. So simply being in an environment around more opportunities will not lead to more learning. And if it does, it's going to be a small amount of learning. So unfortunately, the child may gain a few skills, but their classmates are just increasing their skill set much more rapidly. So the divergence is greater. So the question is, what should we be doing, and who agrees or disagrees about what we should be doing to help these children master social skills and actually in some cases, catch up to their peers? What are people's thoughts about that? Just got a comment. Has anybody run into that in their own life as a parent or a professional?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I'm so sorry.
What's that, Jenny?
Could you repeat that, please? The question.
Yeah, I was saying, as a parent or a professional, have any of you run into this idea that children should be at school to learn social skills, especially children with social emotional delays like autism?
I think I felt it myself rather than actually have it suggested to me by any professionals or other people. But I'm in a situation where actually my son's social opportunities were very, very limited. I'm going to send a question in actually on the chat.
Please.
So yeah, certainly I thought that he would benefit socially from being in school. My son's a teenager now. Yeah. So I'm basically there was a lot of complex trauma in those early formative years that you're talking about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I want to be clear, being at home or in a more limited environment is not always the full solution either, right? I'm not saying that children should be spending all of their early years fully at home, right? We're going to have to find these middle of the road solutions, either being in an educational environment, but having more one-on-one interaction opportunities within that, so we can refine some of these earlier skill sets, or being in a more kind of controlled academic setting by, in a small group or at home setting, and then spending time in play groups and playgrounds and stuff like that to have more access, right? But I understand what you're saying, Jenny. There's not always social opportunities outside of school for many kids, depending on where we live and what the norms are. So I'm not saying that this is, so I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think that's an important factor here. But the concept behind the idea that if we want a child to truly thrive socially and emotionally, we have to make sure that we're providing them with the right learning opportunities. Right? It doesn't necessarily mean it can't be at school, but it doesn't also mean it should be at school.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I was going to add, I think it's important as a professional to educate parents and let them know the importance of relationships and how children develop through the context of relationships. It's actually really interesting. I was reading this article yesterday talking about, it was an advocacy group for pediatricians, and it was talking about how they're trying to include more of this relationship based learning in their curriculum, working with pediatricians,
Yeah.
because pediatricians don't really, they always say, oh, put your kid in daycare, or they need to be in ABA, or they need to be in these rigid environments, because they just have this lack of knowledge and understanding of really how children develop social emotional skills. So it's really interesting. I think just as professionals, we have to work to see that pendulum switch to where it is now.
I saw something, a similar but different article actually about doctors needing those relationships themselves and sometimes not having them as outlets to regulate themselves, and the importance of just having these relationships actually in the medical community for their own personal self-regulate. It was kind of for their own kind of regulation and social emotional skills. And so, but I agree with you. I mean, unfortunately, the medical world, especially in the US, I can't say in other countries, is very focused on kind of a more behavioral or symptomatic model, right? I mean, our entire diagnostic system is based on symptoms, right? We're not looking psychodynamically at what's happening with children, where this is coming from, what the causes are, right? And if you do that, like we talk about in the article, you see that this, that this child is not just missing social skills with peers, which is what the doctor sees. They're not playing with peers, right? So let's teach them how to do it. Or the child is not talking. Let's teach them how to do it, right? They're seeing it very symptomatically and kind of chronologically. But instead, if you look at the whole history of the child and say, okay, well, yes, they're not doing this at age 3 or 4 that they should be doing, but they're also not doing the things that a 2-year-old or even a 1-year-old should be doing across the board. So, how can we, play catch up if we're not going to go fill in the gaps? And it's not that we're doing anything actively by pushing a child to learn these things, but we're going back and nurturing the natural developmental process from the ground up. And if you do that, these types of situations fall into place, right? We don't have to think about school or these types of things, because we think of what is this child's needs, right? What is their profile telling us? And then that becomes the driving force of so many of our decisions. And that was kind of how my father envisioned this entire framework fitting together. Right. I mean, so Yasmin, you talk about sensory integration. I mean, unfortunately, the current state of a lot of sensory integration practices is just about the physical stimulation in the sensory system. Even though Jean Ayres, when she first wrote about sensory integration and the way in which the nervous system integrates itself, she said, and I have an article that I think I can't remember if we've already talked about it in the lectures or we'll get to it later on, but Jean Ayres says very clearly that for the nervous system to fully integrate the sensory system, the experiences a child or individual has around sensory stimulation has to involve additionally a purposeful response from the participant as well as a social response from the participant. So there has to be some sort of social interaction around the physical experience where this participant is taking an active role in the experience, i.e. a floor time session using sensory activities, right? But what happens in most sensory gyms, children are running around for sensory stimulation. They're not having the sense of purpose of interaction, and they're not having the social piece. Even though they're around people, they're looking at them, there's not a direct co-regulated interaction around that sensory experience. And as a result, we don't see the long-term shift in the sensory systems organization, and children continue to need more and more stimulation to burn off the energy. Whereas what we're seeing by integrating the sensory stuff with floor time, right? Because now we have a social emotional exchange, just like Jean Ayres, the mother of sensory integration, first stated, with the sensory experience, we see permanent long-term shifts in a child's sensory needs and sensitivities. So I'm just reading these comments. Sorry, Jenny, I see yours from above. 1 second. What about the adult? Also has regulation difficulties, neurodiverse parent, neurodiverse child. Also in complex tantrums, parent is impacted on, yeah. And this is a challenge, guys. I mean, this happens to all of us. And I would say we all have regulatory issues. I know we do. For those of you that I've talked to, and for those of you who have talked to me, you know, I have regulatory issues. We all do around certain types of emotional experiences, right? That's just how we are individuals. The question is, how significant our dysregulation is, and does it then prevent us from maintaining relationships and, you know, achieving success, etc. Hopefully as adults we're not quite at that point yet, but with the neurodiversity piece, especially with the adults, we have to be taking into consideration their profile as well. Now, it doesn't mean we throw the kind of framework out the window and we say, well, if a parent has challenges themselves, we're not going to expect them to try to work on core interactions. No, we are, but we're going to take their needs into consideration too when they're learning it. I've worked with dozens of parents and adults, even professionals, who either tell me they're part of the neurodiverse community, or some of them even had autism diagnoses themselves. A couple of parents I've worked with have told me that they are diagnosed on the spectrum, and they actually end up becoming some of the greatest floor timers I've ever seen. So for even though these are serious considerations and we never want to look past it, we need to handle these with much more subtlety and specificity about those parents or adults' needs. It doesn't mean they can't do these things.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So just to share a little bit of our experience, we have an 11-year-old son who's on the spectrum, and started him in dual Spanish kindergarten, and academically he excelled really well. But then he started eloping and we saw some regression. So we were able to pull him out and homeschool, and we've been doing so the last few years. Which is great because we see that works for him, and he's able to be happier, calmer. We've removed a ton of anxiety, not all of it.
Sure.
But I'm trying to take what you're saying and presenting and see how I could apply that in real world application. You know, we have him in jujitsu, and he loves going, and
what's it called? Sorry, he's in what?
Sorry, jujitsu.
Oh, jujitsu, great. Oh, wonderful.
Jujitsu. Now he loves to go, but he needs a lot of redirection. Right. So there's not a lot of staff to be able to help him and the other kids because the class has grown. So he likes to be in there, but I see him wanting to like run in circles and stim, and will redirect a lot. But in the instance that you're presenting here, what could we do in those cases to help so that he can function? Because the only reason I'm bringing this up is to like help my brain understand how I would use this in real world situations where he can socialize with other kids, but still have what he's enjoying, but be, like you said, have a purposeful opportunity and response.
Good question, Stephanie, but look at the time. No, I'm just kidding.
Happens every time.
Yeah, exactly. But it is a great question. But think about, whenever you have a question like this, think about kind of his profile, right? What is leading to this behavior? Why are we seeing this behavior, right? And so from what you've told me, and again, my knowledge of the situation is very limited, but what you've told me is that he does have difficulties in social environments and gets overstimulated or distracted or overwhelmed, right? And his response to that, in most of our responses, either revving up or shutting down, and usually a little bit of both. So unfortunately, what it's indicating is that while jiu-jitsu is a great opportunity for him, and if he had that support, he may be able to access more of it. Right now, there may be a simple solution, but oftentimes there isn't. The real solution is a more comprehensive one where we boost his social skills outside of that class. Because unfortunately, classes like or teams and things like that, they're great opportunities to build new relationships, but you have to have the foundation of building a relationship first. Right. And so a child who's struggling socially, putting them in these classes is a great opportunity for them to practice things, but it's not going to be a place for them to learn those things. So we have to make sure that he's already had these experiences where he knows how to forge that relationship, how to interact, how to communicate. And we start very small, one-on-one play dates. Maybe we have small groups of 3 or 4 kids, and then we grow into a larger class size. And then he's in that larger class, he's now going to be feeling more calm and stable because he knows he can interact and communicate with these people versus getting excited, not knowing what to do and running around. Oftentimes what happens. Does that kind of map onto what you're saying, you think?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, like these children have become like part of his core community, and so
Yeah.
they will come over for play dates, but because he doesn't necessarily engage or interact with them, he likes to be around them, but that exchange isn't happening. So I don't know how to make that
Right.
naturally
Okay.
happen.
Another great part of the question. So then it needs to be facilitated, meaning that with someone who actually has some decent floor time training, because that's, you know, the model we subscribe to, which the reason why it's so important, and it doesn't have to be floor time, but someone who's not trying to teach him what to do, right? We need him to
Okay.
figure out how to adapt and plan, right? Those are two of the toughest things in our social skills. How do we make an adaptive response and show reciprocity, but also how do I, how there's a nice article. Yes, exactly. Great. I will work on that, Sylvia. But we need to be there to facilitate the thinking process, right? He needed to be figured out. Now, usually, unfortunately, at home around our familiar toys, this is toughest because kids who are already predisposed to playing with their toys a certain way don't want someone else coming in and messing up their Matchbox cars or their Legos or whatever it is.
Right.
If all of a sudden we're at a playground or a neutral sensory gym, you know, with a therapist who knows how to facilitate the exchange, because the exchange is the goal, not the play. Now all of a sudden they're practicing communicating and interacting with one another in a more developmentally appropriate environment. Whereas the small toys, especially familiar small toys, are the hardest place to do that.
So realistically, this would be modeled by an adult or therapist, not peer to peer.
Well, I try not to use the word modeling because modeling is still adult teaching, right? It's not about him just memorizing or watching someone else do it. It's about him developing his own tools to do it, him truly being able to think and adapt for himself. Because if I model what you're doing, I'm not thinking and adapting, I'm replicating, right? So unfortunately, modeling is not a technique we use. But we do facilitate the interaction and the communication between the peer-to-peer or child to adult. And if he can't do it child to adult, he's got to start there, right? We have to be in a continuous interaction with an adult before we're going to be able to apply that interaction to a peer.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And Stephanie, this seems like a broader situation. So if you did want to just chat via email, send me an email. We can go through this stuff a little bit more. I'm happy to help.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and I didn't want to hijack the meeting. I was just trying to give from like a parent perspective, like.
But those are great questions, and it's important. So I'm glad you brought it up. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Any other? We'll go in just about 1 minute here, everybody. But did anybody want to give a final question or comment? All right, then, everybody. I will let. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
It's been fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I really appreciate you all coming on. Sorry, Jenny, did you have something to add?
No, just wanted to say how much sense it all makes.
It's, you know, the thing that always astounds me about my father's work is it really is intuitive, but we've all essentially been told to ignore our intuition around these things. You know, we have all of these professionals from so many different directions giving us feedback, and none of it's wrong. It just may not be right for your child, right? It may not be right for where they are at this moment, because very few doctors, very few therapists are able to take the full child's profile into consideration, right? That was one of my kind of father's first gifts to the community, was saying, here is your child. They are not a diagnosis, right? They are an individual with a unique profile, and that profile is leading to some of these symptoms, and that's leading to the diagnosis. But let's treat the child, right? So I guess, well, let's leave on that, everybody. But I hope they keep coming, and I hope I can keep giving you some good articles. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Bye, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Oh, that's wonderful. I'm glad to hear this feedback. Thank you, Sylvia.